This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast. Our musical inspiration for today's episode comes from the Sisters of Mercy, an old goth band with the classic goth hit called Marian. I thought it was a good song to set us in the mood for our topic today, because today we are going to be once again driving this golf cart into the darkness together and talking about the power of your subconscious mind, and not just to understand it, but really for the purpose of using it and managing it, and also trusting it so that it doesn't interfere with your ability to make decisions and create good outcomes for yourself and your life, but also for the purpose of learning how to trust it. So that is what we're doing today on the show, just in time for Halloween. And I wanted to address this topic specifically for a variety of reasons. But I think the biggest one is that, as you probably know, I get a lot of listener questions. You know, people email and ask about all kinds of things, and I welcome that. I mean, that's really what this show is about, is helping you and providing, hopefully, useful information that supports your journey of growth. So that's really what I'm doing here. But I have found it interesting that lately I have a lot of people getting in touch with me asking for advice, but for situations that are often much more complex and that can't really be resolved without a high degree of self-awareness and intentional effort. And also, there's a certain quality to some of them that people feel very powerless. And so let me give you a couple of examples. So here are a few recent questions that I've edited for clarity. But, you know, a typical one is, Dr. Lisa, why am I having these really frustrating dynamics and communication patterns happening in my relationship over and over again? Or, Dr. Lisa, how can I get my partner to behave differently? That's a fun one. Dr. Lisa, why do I keep failing to attract and maintain relationships with people who love me back? Or, Dr. Lisa, how can I stay motivated and on track towards my goals? I feel like I'm sabotaging myself and I don't know why. I've also had people ask recently in various ways, but the punchline is, how can I feel better about myself? What's going on with that? And then lastly, and this is starting to pop up more frequently as we approach the holidays, but Dr. Lisa, how can I keep my parents and or in-laws from making me absolutely insane? And so, people ask these questions, and if you have recently asked a question like that, first of all, thank you. I mean, thank you for getting in touch and letting me know what's on your mind. But it's interesting for me because these questions often end with, please tell me what to do to fix this. Love, XYZ. I'm like, okay. And so what I wanted to talk about on the show today, particularly as it relates to the subconscious mind, is the fact that in order to really make real and lasting change in any of these kinds of areas, it requires not buying into this myth that I think is very prevalent in our culture, that there is a thing that will change it, or a piece of advice, or one specific practice that is going to really change things for you on its own. I think that there's a lot of just, well-meaning, well-intentioned advice out there. I think I've probably been guilty of doing the same, 3 easy steps to create, change in your relationship or something like that. And I think there are a couple of pieces to this. On the one hand, it is absolutely true that doing things differently will give you different results in your relationships and the way that you feel about yourself and the goals that you're able to attain. It does require action. However, whenever anyone is like, okay, I heard about this advice or I read this self-help book and I'm going to do XYZ and it's going to change everything for me, they inevitably fail. And the reason why is because when people go towards change or like incorporating a new idea without doing the core work that's really necessary on a deeper level, the work that really involves understanding who you are and the power of the subconscious forces inside of you. There are a lot of thoughts and feelings and core beliefs and judgments that are always happening in us, very much outside of our conscious awareness. And I think that the real essence of high quality personal growth work is putting you in contact with that. And the reason why it's important is that your subconscious mind is much, much, much more powerful than anything else when it comes to influencing your behavior. And so if you have not done the work of really understanding what's going on inside of you subconsciously and very deliberately get that into alignment with the change that you're trying to achieve in your life, the change will be unsuccessful. And it's frustrating and it's confusing. And so today, what I really wanted to talk about is that piece that I think often goes undiscussed when we're talking about personal growth or making changes in your life, because that's the part that'll really move the needle. So let's back up for just a second. Oh, and first of all, I forgot to mention that I am also once again recording this podcast live on Instagram. I want to take a moment just to say hello to some of the people that have joined me online today. And I'm also streaming this live on YouTube, for better or for worse. So I am once again doing this at noon Mountain Time on a Monday. If anybody would like to join me at any point in the future, I'm going to be doing this most Mondays, I think, because I've really been enjoying the opportunity to talk with people and kind of ask questions in real time. And so if any of you guys have questions for me that I can answer as we go through this today, feel free to jump in. So otherwise, let's just dive right in to talk more about the subconscious mind and how to understand it and how to make it work for you. So one of the biggest issues is really bringing what is going on inside of you subconsciously most of the time into the light. And one thing that I think more traditional insight-oriented therapy has is a real advantage in that when people have the opportunity to talk through thoughts and feelings and perspectives and reactions, particularly of an emotional nature, or if they're being asked questions about their formative years or experiences that impacted them, that is enormously helpful in bringing the subconscious to light, because being able to put into words, and when you put things into words, you're also bringing them into your consciousness about these things that are oftentimes going unsaid inside of you. And so the real beauty of traditional insight-oriented therapy is that through the experiences of talking about yourself to a therapist that's also asking you questions and helping you maybe think about different aspects of your experience that you hadn't thought of before, it brings aspects of yourself into conscious awareness that you might not always think about. And that is fantastic. However, I think one of the reasons that I have kind of moved away from that traditional therapy approach over the years is that oftentimes in therapy, that's where it ends. The goal of therapy can be to develop insight without them tying it to what to do with that, like how do you use this information to create a change? And I, as you may know, am definitely more of an action-oriented person, which is why I've really pursued coaching over the last few years. However, a huge issue that I often have with typical coaches who do not have the background in psychotherapy and mental health is that they're often very quick to rush into action, and let's talk about solutions, and let's talk about changes, right? And they're absolutely correct, because all of the advised solutions and strategies will work if you applied them. But I think the limitation of coaching is that they're often applying solutions and strategies without going into the foundation of understanding what's going on inside of people subconsciously first. And when that happens, what is often created, and I think the reason for failure, is that they're pulled in different directions. Your subconscious frequently has a different agenda for you than your conscious mind does. So without uncovering what's going on subconsciously in terms of your motivations or your core needs or your judgments or your automatic beliefs, solutions that are advised that are not consistent with that subconscious mind will fail. And lead people to feel extremely frustrated in the process. And, because they really feel like they're doing everything that they can to change their lives and change their circumstances and relationships, but it doesn't work. And sadly, oftentimes people end up blaming themselves, which is never ideal. Anyway, so today what we're really going to dive into is threefold. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about what your subconscious mind actually is, so that you can just have that conceptual understanding of it. And then I'm going to give you a couple of really specific strategies. First of all, some tips and tricks to help make your subconscious mind more conscious, so you can gain that self-awareness that's so crucial to making change. But we're also going to be talking about how you can use your subconscious to really help you create change and solve problems, and kind of tap into your creative and intuitive mind more easily, because there's so much value in being able to do that. So first of all, most of your brain, believe it or not, is running the show behind the scenes when you're not actively thinking about things. I've heard various numbers thrown about over the years, that 20% of your brain is your consciousness and 80% is kind of, doing things behind the scenes. I've heard it said 10% of your mind is in your conscious control. And actually what more current research suggests is that it's more like 5% of your brain is the brain that we know, the brain that thinks conscious thoughts and makes decisions and kind of has a running commentary that we're aware of. That is a tiny bit of your brain power. All the rest of it is happening behind the scenes, and it is alert, and it is active, and it's very fast. For example, your subconscious brain will make judgments about things that you're not even aware of. And it will be kind of comparing your life experiences to the core beliefs that it holds. And as a result, it will oftentimes have reactions to things, particularly emotional reactions, like kind of what we talked about last week, but more tied into core values or beliefs that we're not aware of. And once your subconscious mind is really quickly making those judgments, making decisions, having emotional reactions, then your conscious mind kind of slowly grinds into action, and then honestly usually acts to support whatever your subconscious mind has already decided. So in this way, because your subconscious mind is such a major player in the way that you feel and the way that you think and the way that you rationalize different things that are going on in your mind, it's really important to be aware of what's happening, because your subconscious mind, without that awareness, will really shape the way not just like you react in the moment, but over time, it will shape the way that your entire life unfolds. Because your subconscious mind is such a key player in the way that we interact with other people, the way we react to things that happen in our lives, the way that we behave in the moment, and the way that we respond to different situations, and also in the way that we go about our lives in terms of day-to-day habits. So much of that is controlled by our subconscious. And those practices, our reactions or our behaviors or our habits or our choices, those are the moments that build the outcomes of our lives. And so it can be kind of troubling to consider that all of that is happening in some ways like outside of our conscious volition. But the good news is that by learning how to bring more of this into your conscious awareness, that you can have more control over the way that things turn out for you. So that's the goal, is really to learn how to be more intentional and less reactive. And that's when things can change in a real or lasting way. And so first of all, I promised a little bit of discussion about the way that your brain works. And this is in honor of not just my therapy and coaching clients, but I know my listeners tend to be very intellectual, smarty pants types, and that you guys value from just an informational, like research-based approach. So as a card-carrying nerd, I'm your girl. And let's have a mini biology lesson for a second. So your brain, believe it or not, developed in layers. So at the very most basic, oldest part of your brain in evolutionary terms is your brain stem and your hindbrain, and that controls things like heartbeat and respiration, which goes on entirely, outside of our mental control. And then after that came the midbrain, and this is a part of our brains that we have in common with other mammals, and this is really the seat of emotion, the part of your brain that feels things and has emotional reactions, is a deeper part of your brain. And then the most recent development when it comes to brains is our cortex and neocortex. And this part of your brain is like the outermost layer and arguably what makes humans human. This is the part of you that thinks, it envisions, it plans into the future, and it forms thoughts, and it puts those thoughts into language. And so this is the part of our brain that we're most aware of. But in addition to just that, we also have left and right hemispheres of our brains that are equally powerful. But I think in our dominant Western culture, we've often prioritized the abilities of the left-hand side of our brain, which tends to be responsible for more analytical reasoning type functions, language, formulating coherent thoughts. It also tends to be more internally focused, like kind of thinking about what we're thinking about, versus our right hand side of our brain, which is more visual, more auditory. It tends to think in pictures, it envisions things. It's identified as the seat of creativity a lot of times. It's more externally focused, kind of taking in information from the outside world. And compared to the left brain, which is more like a linear thought process, like if this, then that, the right hemisphere of your brain tends to be more of a web thinker. So it can make connections between different things that aren't always entirely logical or obvious, hence, creativity. And so there's a lot going on inside of you, both in terms of different layers of your brain and the sides of your brain. And so I think that a lot of what we think of when it comes to the subconscious can be all of the information that your brain is currently storing in a dormant state. Like you don't need access to all of it all at the same time. That would be terrible for us to be having flooded, getting flooded with all of that information all the time. So it sort of like selectively gives you what you need when you think about it, which is good. But it's also generating ideas and holding on to core beliefs and comparing things and taking in information all the time, whether or not you are aware of it. So the key to mastery here is, first of all, uncovering what is going on in your subconscious mind so that you can then make decisions about whether or not what's happening in there is to your benefit or not. Many of our unconscious beliefs and thoughts and ideas are really helpful to us. And so that's not saying that what's happening in your subconscious mind is necessarily bad. However, many people, when they begin this personal growth work, find that they have really like outdated ideas that they are subconsciously holding on to, perhaps things that were true for them in an earlier phase of their life are no longer true for them as adults, or they might be holding on to rules or values that were true for their parents, perhaps, but are not actually true for them. Also, there can be just weird associations that have developed over the years that are back there that you don't really know about until you begin intentionally kind of pulling everything out and taking a look at what's going on. And so from there, once you have that awareness, you can then perhaps decide to intentionally change some of those core beliefs from an empowered place, as opposed to letting them just kind of have their way with you. But the other piece of mastery here is, once I think you've done that work and gotten a sense of what's going on in there in the first place, then you can decide what of that process you'd like to practice intentionally trusting and relying on exactly as it is. So there's a lot here. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about how to understand your subconscious brain. That's where this all starts. And to be totally honest with you, it can be very, very challenging to tap into what is true for our subconscious selves, because it is so ingrained inside of us. It feels so true. It just sort of feels like who we are and what is actually happening, to the degree that we're not even aware that other people might have a different belief or a different perception or a different interpretation of reality than we do. So it's like we're all sort of swimming in our own broth to the degree that it's just normal. And so it really requires like feedback or an outside perspective to even begin to consider that some of these things that just feel so ingrained are actually volitional. And what else is true is that most of the time, because it's just sort of like the air you breathe, really, in terms of what just is, that people do not actually begin to reflect on what is banging around inside of their heads, or what is causing them to feel the way they feel or react the way they react, until it begins causing problems. Either they're feeling badly, or they are behaving in ways that they don't really want to behave in, and they feel a little bit out of control, or they are aware that they're having like non-ideal outcomes in various aspects of their life, either in their relationships or their careers. And so they often come into therapy or coaching like to figure out what's going on. Either, it's help me feel better, or help me behave better, or help me get better results in my life. That's like the presenting issue. But that is like the doorway that we can then begin to unwind what is actually going on inside of them that will ultimately give them the power to either feel better or create changes. And I think that right there is the true transformational power of great therapy or coaching, which is just that like agreement between two people who are working together, that we're making the subconscious conscious, that they are invited to talk about things that they don't usually talk about in a confidential space, where they are putting into words these things that often go unsaid or unconsidered altogether. And like, back in the day, what Freud and Jung and those really old school psychoanalysts were onto, they had somebody lay down on the couch for an hour, 5 days a week, and just talk, stream of consciousness, whatever pops into your head. And while there is not actually a ton of research to support that in itself was, helpful to people in a sense of changing their lives. What it was really good at is like helping people just push out the contents of their brain in a very obvious way that then made the patterns or the way that they were thinking or their core beliefs obvious. And again, a lot of times for that traditional insight-oriented psychotherapy, that's where it stops. Like, okay, great. Now that we know you feel this way because of this thing that happened to you, you were 3. There we go. And it's like, I don't think that it can end there, but I do think that just having the opportunity to talk through things is enormously helpful. And also, I think to have a person who's pointing out that is a core belief, or that's a value, or that is a way of thinking that we might be able to modify is often very surprising for people to hear, particularly when it's just such an ingrained way of being that they don't think about it at all. Getting that feedback can be very illuminating for people. And so when we do this with people, either in coaching or counseling, oftentimes the things that come up that are the real like culprit that are creating problems for people subconsciously take a number of different forms, but these are some of the usual suspects. Either people are subconsciously making judgments about themselves or other people that lead them to feel unhappy with other people or with themselves, or feel frustrated with other people because they are not living up to these like subconscious expectations or rules that they might be having subconsciously. Also, sometimes we find that people can have very old core beliefs around their lack of competence. They will anticipate failure or other negative outcomes, and that can be very inhibiting when it comes to trying new things or feeling like they can take positive action on their own behalf. So there's almost like this frozen thing that goes on with people when that's happening. Also, many times people have this subconscious anticipation of not even just rejection, but oftentimes like hostility or hurt from other people. And that can lead them to like expect that other people aren't going to treat them well. And as a result, when they have that subconscious belief, they can interpret fairly neutral things as being, hurtful or rejecting or painful in some way. And they respond to people like that. So, it's an extreme example, but somebody says, please pass the salt, and person B, if they have a lot of subconscious thoughts and feelings about how other people are going to be mean to them, they will like, get your own darn salt, reacting to people in ways that are really damaging to relationships. So those are often very important to kind of unpeel and get to. So that having subconscious expectations of others or subconscious anticipation of feeling attacked or persecuted. Oftentimes, though, people can also have not even like specific thoughts or beliefs, but ways of thinking that are so ingrained that they're unconscious, but that they can result in a ton of even depression and anxiety. Like, for example, if someone subconsciously engages in a lot of black and white thinking, like it's either this or that, they can feel very paralyzed and anxious when there's only like 2 paths in front of them and neither of them are good. Also, people can, again, hold on to a lot of rules that they're not even totally aware of. And oftentimes, if you encounter someone who seems very angry, or if you feel that way sometimes in your relationship, there's a good chance that there are subconscious rules that other people are violating, and it is really upsetting you. But the point is, when we dive into the subconscious and bring these rules to light, then you can decide, like, why do I think that this is a rule? Is it actually reasonable that I expect that everybody in the world should do this like me? Those kinds of things. Another thing that can be very damaging and destructive is when people are subconsciously engaging in a lot of negative self talk. Believe it or not, and this, is very common. It might even be true for you that people are, without even fully realizing it, having this running commentary towards themselves in their mind that is like, yeah, that was crappy. You suck. That was awful. This isn't going to end well. No, don't do that. Why did you do that? That was so dumb. Like, really, this just like narrative, this stream of consciousness that is almost like a bully living inside of their own brain, that contributes to a lot of self-doubt and feelings of anger towards the self, shame, even internalized shame. And then lastly, something that we're all extremely vulnerable to, and there is an ocean of research around this from not just social psychology, but marketing research, believe it or not, is that we are all vulnerable to subconscious priming. So that if you have an experience or you're exposed to a certain idea, it changes the way that you perceive what happens next and the way that you react. So there is so much going on. And so I've just kind of given you an overview of the usual suspects of what's not helpful when it comes to the subconscious mind, but there are also a lot of positive, oftentimes really affirming core beliefs and ways of thinking and expectations that are going on inside of you too. So the process of getting in touch with your subconscious is not in any way intended to be like, going into the darkness and wrestling all the bad stuff, but it's just sort of seeing like what's there and what is valuable and useful to you. For example, old ideas about the fact that people are generally good and have generally good intentions, and that most people are really just like you at the end of the day and probably feel the same way that you do and want the same things that you do. Those types of ideas make it easier to have empathy for other people and to engage and respond to other people in a more helpful way. Core ideas and subconscious beliefs that you are fundamentally competent and able to solve problems and take action on your own behalf, that you have control over your life and over your outcomes is really positive. Deep core beliefs that things are eventually going to be okay is enormously comforting. And also beliefs that people have a right to their own autonomy, that people have the right to their own thoughts and feelings and ways of doing things, even if they're different from yours. Again, that leads to being more tolerant and I think less reactive when it comes to managing interpersonal things. So again, all of these are good things, and there are many, many more when it comes to positive subconscious core beliefs. But the first clue that there is work to be done for any of us when it comes to engaging in our subconscious mind in a more explicit way is when you're feeling bad, or when you're getting frustrating results, or when the same kinds of patterns keep happening again and again in your life. That is an indication that there's something going on subconsciously that is worth exploring. And, there's also a lot of research to back up the utility of doing this. One of the types of therapy that has the most evidence behind it to support its efficacy, and I think it also has some limitations, but is something called cognitive therapy. And the whole point of this therapy is to focus on the way that you are thinking, and then making very specific changes in the way that you are thinking that lead to feeling better. And I think the reason that cognitive therapy has such a good track record and so much research behind it is that it kind of combines those two schools. Like there is obviously some insight that comes up when we understand how you're thinking in the first place, but then it combines it with specific action around, okay, so now what do we do to change this? Again, I think that the limit of cognitive therapy, like any therapies, is that it's oftentimes very focused on maladaptive, pathologized kinds of experiences. So it's like a treatment for depression or anxiety or OCD, things that are issues for people. I don't think that it's oftentimes applied to the kinds of personal growth work that many people are really looking for. So there are limitations there too. But at its core, good stuff. So let me tell you some ways that you might get more deeply in touch with your subconscious mind. I mean, one is what we've been discussing, which is putting yourself in situations where you have the opportunity to give a voice to your feelings. Counseling, coaching, even journaling can be helpful. Although with journaling, you're still like in your own head. Other ways of bringing your subconscious mind into your conscious awareness are through other activities like observing the way that you behave or the way that you react to situations, particularly when it doesn't make a lot of sense. When we develop that observer mindset within ourselves, you can begin to understand the duality. This is often the case if you find yourself acting in ways that are different than how you intend, or that are not totally congruent with the outcomes that you would like to achieve. So sort of just developing that ability to think about yourself in a different way can give you a lot of really interesting insight into the way that your subconscious mind is showing up. It's also true that going back and noticing the patterns that you may have experienced in your life, either in relationships or in the way that you behave. When you have ongoing patterns that have happened over and over again in your life, it can give you a lot of really valuable information when it comes to understanding how your subconscious mind could be influencing the things that you do. So I think oftentimes almost like putting together a timeline, of these are things that have happened to me. These are some of the situations that seem to be coming up over and over again. It can be enormously valuable. This is one that I think can be harder to do for yourself, but I wanted to throw it out there anyway because it's so powerful, is that when people engage in projective tests, you can get so much important information. And so when I say projective tests, this is actually a psychological testing tool that, psychologists such as myself are taught, and it is a way of creating a space for people to literally project their subconscious thoughts in an outer setting so that the information becomes available. So, a basic projective test is tell me a story about XYZ. So, when doing psychological testing, there are projective test cards where it's, you hand someone a neutral scene, a family sitting at a dinner table, perhaps, and tell me a story about this family, and then what, and then what, and through that kind of exploration, an enormous amount of information can be gathered about how that person feels, how they perceive others, how they react to other people. And so there are lots of ways of doing that. And you can do some of this with journaling, but again, it can be helpful to do this kind of projective work with someone. But I will also tell you that another really powerful projective test that we often use in therapy or in coaching is the way that people react, even to us, like as a therapist. Like I am pretty much the same person in most situations. And when I am having a relationship with a client that treats me substantially differently than I usually experience with other people, that is a lot of information for me about how they are interpreting me through the lens of their subconscious beliefs and feelings and expectations. And so again, in your own life, to do this for yourself, I mean, if you think about how do I usually feel with people? What kinds of reactions do I usually have to people? That is very indicative of you. Either the way that you are reacting to people, or subconsciously the kind of people that you might be drawn into having relationships with. And so it's for exactly these kinds of reasons why when people ask me some of the questions that I went over, at the beginning of our time together, because these things are so powerful and so hidden, my saying, say please and thank you to your wife instead of XYZ. Those kinds of like high level advice kinds of tips, they will get blown away like a piece of tissue paper in a hurricane when someone has these really old, powerful core beliefs about others, about themselves, about relationships, about expectations. And without the opportunity to crack into that and understand that, people will just have the same kinds of experiences over and over and over again. So this work is extremely important. Other ways of cracking into your subconscious self that can be really interesting and effective. So because so much of your mind is active when you're not really thinking about it, but because day to day, our conscious brain is so powerful. I mean, we're oftentimes very distracted about whatever we are consciously thinking about, or what is happening in front of us, or, the situation at hand, or even what we're thinking about on the inside. It doesn't leave a lot of room for our subconscious brain to communicate to us. But there are like these little cracks that can happen in your day that are different, and different opportunities there. So things like being able to pay attention to what's going on in your brain right before you fall asleep can actually be very instructive on that level. Furthermore, thinking about your dreams in a more conscious and coherent way can be really adaptive. So even, something as simple as keeping a dream journal next to your bed and recording the things that you dream about in a more explicit way can help give you some insight into what's going on into your subconscious mind. Other times, and I think a lot of creative people can use this to their advantage, when you are doing things that don't really take a whole lot of brain power, so your conscious brain is kind of turned off a little bit, so things like showering or walking or knitting, you might become aware that you have these little creative bursts, or even intrusive thoughts almost, that are like these little messages from your subconscious brain. And these are often very illuminatory. Is that even a word? They illuminate what is happening in your subconscious brain in a very powerful way. So that can be really helpful. Other things that can help are simply starting to pay attention to it, and like slowing down and being more reflective about what's going on inside of you, especially during the times that you are having reactions to things that might not always make sense. Once you have done that type of personal growth work, you can then also begin very deliberately learning how to trust and rely on your subconscious mind to be kind of like walking by your side as you go through your day to really help you. And this is really neat. And we do a lot of this type of work with creative people, but I think that it can work for all of us. And the first thing is that it requires a new basic assumption, which is, I am operating on a much deeper level than I know about consciously, and there are a lot of useful things happening in my brain almost all the time that I am not always fully aware of. And just having that thought I think is super helpful because it gives you access to this part of your mind that I think a lot of times is not fully appreciated for what it really is. Because what is true is that in addition to being kind of the seat of core beliefs and judgments and feelings, your subconscious mind is very, very active. It is thinking on a subconscious level. It can solve problems and kind of put things together for you in a way that is oftentimes really staggering when you learn how to use this. You're taking in information all of the time, whether or not you're totally aware of it. And on a deep level, your brain is synthesizing all of this and will present new ideas to you if you allow it to. And a hallmark of this process is like having a fully formed thought just kind of like happen, that light bulb going off kind of moment. Isaac Newton sitting under the apple tree and getting bonked on the head with an apple. Like, there's a good chance that he had been on some level putting kind of key ingredients into his subconscious mind that then gestated and gave birth to a fully formed idea that he was not totally aware of at the time. And like some creative people or people who do a lot of intellectual work, work that requires them to be solving problems or coming up with innovative solutions or new ideas, learn how to harness this. And I've worked with creative people who will actually subconsciously, consciously rather, ask their subconscious mind to solve a problem or come up with a new idea and then stop thinking about it. Like, they consciously stop thinking about it, knowing that sooner or later the answer will come. And you can use this for a wide variety of applications. I mean, if you're going through a difficult situation in your life, you can say, subconscious, I do not know what to do, so I'm going to let you think about this and bring me a few different options, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. And then stop thinking about it and go about your life. And it's unusual that when people are really engaging with their subconscious selves in this kind of way, that at least some valuable information doesn't come to them sooner or later. A lot of creative people too, or people who have to think about things for a living, will oftentimes create a practice where they simply make themselves available at certain times of the day. I mean, Stephen King, the writer, is a classic example. He describes having a very structured work day where he simply shows up in front of his computer at the same time every morning, ready to type. The writer and podcaster Melissa Gilbert describes a similar podcast where she just, shows up at regularly scheduled intervals, ready to receive a transmission from, air quote, the muse or creativity or whatever you want to call it. But really, it's her subconscious brain that has been active outside of her conscious awareness. And being able to tap into that is really, really powerful. And I think this also gives some understanding to the research that we see that supports this idea that the most intellectually difficult or creative or problem-solving types of activities are really enhanced when people back off from the work itself and stop deliberately thinking about it or trying to rationally solve a problem by, 2 + 2 = 4 kinds of efforts, and instead do something else, like engaging activities that allows their subconscious mind the opportunity to just kind of chug along and hum around and think about different things and sort of put things together and take things apart without consciously being aware of it. So, you see a lot of enormously successful intellectual or creative types spending a lot of time doing things that are not directly related to their core work, like playing music or doing sports or knitting or sleeping or going on hikes or being in nature or, So it's like you have to give it some space and trust it to be able to work. many of the ideas that come to people can feel very creative, but there's also an argument that this is the true seat of our intuition itself. There are many things that people know without consciously knowing, or that have not had like an obvious path to understanding. Do you know what I mean? So like these flashes of intuition, or when you know things that are true for you. I don't know, maybe it could be some like quasi spiritual thing, but a more plausible reason is that your subconscious mind has really been, right there by your side, taking in all the information and synthesizing things and making associations that you might not be consciously aware of, and coming up with a truth, but by means of a different system than your logical and conscious brain might come up with. And it's often the correct answer, even though we don't know why. And particularly when it comes to things related to your basic security and survival. There is a marvelous book. It's called The Gift of Fear. It's an older book now. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but it's called The Gift of Fear. And it documents the many, many, many examples of times that people have been in situations where on a subconscious level, their brain has kind of been like recording activity around them or paying attention to little details that they weren't consciously aware of. And they were overwhelmed with feelings of fear, or like, I need to get out of here. And they acted on it, and it saved their lives. So particularly if you find yourself feeling unusually freaked out or uncomfortable in a situation, it could be that you're getting really important information from your subconscious mind that you should pay attention to. But it can be a little bit challenging to learn when to trust this and when to not. Kind of like what we were talking about last week when it comes to understanding your emotions and becoming emotionally healthy. Like the prerequisite of this work is to do a really good job of ferreting out what you usually think about, and particularly the unhelpful core beliefs or associations or old life experiences that lead to like feeling fearful or getting in the way of positive outcomes. But then once you know that, it becomes easier and more obvious to pay attention to like different, more unusual communications from your subconscious mind that you should listen to. I know that probably sounds a little bit confusing, but an example would be like if you've lived through some really hard early experiences where you weren't safe with people, you might feel unsafe with people currently, even in fairly neutral situations. And you might act like you're unsafe, like you might get combative or you might withdraw. And this can be really disruptive to your relationships. But if you've done the kind of work that I'm talking about and you know this about yourself, you can really intentionally and deliberately practice the types of things that would help you feel safer in the present moment, either different core beliefs or some present moment awareness skills, and do that really consciously. And that can change the way you feel. And then, as a result, change the way that you react, and your relationships will get better. But if you have done all of this work and you're like really self-aware, you trust yourself to respond well to people, and you're like living in that sort of like stage of enlightenment, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, then if you have an unusual occurrence where you're kind of out of the blue, like, wow, I do not like this person and I'm feeling really intensely about that, I'm not totally sure why, or if you're like lightning bolt of, ooh, I feel really unsafe right now and I feel like I need to get out of here, but I can't think of a good reason why, like, once you're in that space and you can kind of identify like your usual machinations from like these really different, unique experiences, that will really help you trust those times that you're getting an important message from your subconscious that you should listen to, as opposed to kind of an artifact that you might need to override. So lots of information in this podcast. I hope that it gives you some direction for how to understand yourself and redirect yourself if necessary, and intentionally use the power of your subconscious for the purpose of all good things. And, I have to tell you, as I was putting together this podcast for today recently, I became aware that my subconscious mind has been guiding my work lately. And I almost laughed out loud because I really did not literally think about what I was doing. But, an ongoing intention for me personally is to do things on this show that are going to be genuinely meaningful and helpful to you, to my listeners. And then, so that's kind of my basic intention. But what I just realized last week is that as I've been kind of designing topics for the show and talking about different things, I've actually been walking everybody through a experience that's organized similarly to the way that I organize the work that I do with my clients, which is, first we're going to talk about self-awareness, and we're going to talk about understanding yourself and having compassion for yourself. And then, in the next few weeks, we're going to be moving into other topics like, how to understand relationships, starting with a relationship that you have with yourself, and then how to talk about and manage boundaries, or how to handle toxic relationships, or particularly triggering relationships. And I think subconsciously I've started doing this in preparation for the holidays, which are often stressful from a relational point of view. And then after that, to kind of cruise into having a really successful new year. So my subconscious mind has been organizing that for all of us. I hope that it's been helpful for you. Not that any of this is in any way a substitute or even remotely similar to the type of experience you have in actual therapy or coaching, but it's kind of along the same lines. So I hope that it's been good for you too. So that's it for our show today. I'll be back in touch next time when we're going to be talking about how to have a healthy relationship with yourself. I'm excited about this topic. And in the meantime, thank you again for joining me, for listening today to the podcast, or joining me on Instagram or YouTube. I will be back again next Monday at 12 p.m. Mountain if you'd like to do this again. And in the meantime, thank you for your questions and also for sharing the show. I've heard from so many of you that you've shared the show or specific episodes to people in your lives who you think could benefit from hearing some of this information. And on behalf of them, thank you. And thank you too for rating or reviewing this show wherever you happen to listen to it, because that small action on your part helps other people find the podcast in their moment of need and to help support their personal growth process. So on behalf of them, thank you for your support of the show, and we'll talk again soon. All right, take care.